this is your first time joining us or you're a longtime supporter, we welcome you to the place to be challenged by leading speakers and to advance important ideas collectively. I also want to send out a special welcome to those who are joining us virtually. I'm Lisa Harris, CEO of Eskenazi Health, and I'm honored to serve as president of the Economic Club of Indiana this season. First things first, before I introduce our guests at the president's table, I want to make sure we express our gratitude once again to our presenting sponsor, One America Financial, and also to all of our platinum sponsors who you see here on the banners, many of whom have supported us for 15 to 20 years or more. Last season, our luncheon conversations often became trending topics online, so let's keep that momentum going by expanding today's conversation through social media. This is the one place you get out your phone, make sure it's on, post, tweet, or like us so that your friends will know that you're involved in the lively conversations at the Economic Club of Indiana. The Economic Club Twitter handle is @EconomicClubIn. Tweet using the hashtag EconLunch. You'll also find us on Facebook at the Economic Club of Indiana. And as you likely know from our pre-event email, we offer a special parking rate thanks to our friends at Denison Parking. If you parked in the Plaza Park garage, please be sure to pick up a QR code after lunch to pay a special event parking rate of $12 for the day. That's the normal price of 1 hour, so we thank you, Denison, for that. And now let's present our president's table. Would each of you please stand as I introduce you? Again, we are pleased to have One America Financial as our presenting sponsor for the season. Joining us today from One America Financial is Ryan Berry, who serves as Vice President, Marketing, Strategy, and Operations. In this role, Ryan leads the One America Financial marketing technology, analytics, and operations functions within enterprise marketing and communications, and is responsible for the organization's overall marketing strategy, ensuring that marketing initiatives center on effective experiences for both customers and distribution partners of One America Financial. Welcome, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. Again, one more round of applause for One America Financial. Next, we're pleased to have Victor Cruz, Senior Vice President of Corporate Engineering and Global Health, Safety, and Environmental with Eli Lilly and Company, a longtime platinum sponsor of the Economic Club. In this role, Victor leads Lilly's efforts integrating sustainability into their business while working to meet their 2030 environmental goals of reducing emissions, waste, and resource use. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Victor, and to Eli Lilly. Then we have Grace Findley, Chief Development and Partnerships Officer with the Indianapolis Foundation, a platinum sponsor. In this role, Grace leads an ambitious campaign to raise philanthropic contributions and generate co-investment funds to support the foundation's efforts in improving outcomes for the community. The Indianapolis Foundation has been committed for over 100 years to mobilizing people, ideas, and investments to make ours a community where all have equitable access to opportunity. Environmental equity is one of the 4 strategic priorities of their Equity Imperative 2030 strategic plan, with the ultimate vision being that everyone enjoys the same degree of additional health, equal access to decision-making processes in order to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. Thank you so much for joining us today, Grace. And a special thanks to the Indianapolis Foundation for serving as this month's luncheon sponsor. Next, we have John Baer, President and CEO of Midcontinent Independent System Operator, or MISO. We're going to hear a lot more about John after lunch. Thank you for being here. As we continue to celebrate this milestone season, we've been acknowledging individuals and organizations who have made a significant impact in helping making the Economic Club of Indiana what it is today. It's my pleasure this afternoon to be welcoming and honoring today's special guest, Owen B. Bud Melton, who is joined by his wife, Christine. Bud has been a longtime leader in the Indianapolis community. He was also a longtime banker, first working with Robert McKinney, groundbreaking CEO of First Indiana Bank, now BMO Harris Bank, and a partner in the development of the Economic Club. Encompassing a 25-year career at First Indiana, Bud worked his way up the ranks, serving 20 years as president and CEO before retiring in 2003. After interrupting his IU Bloomington career for 4 years to enlist in the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War, he received a Bachelor of Science degree at the IU Kelley School of Business from the former Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, and I will say we might remember the former for all the folks in the room who are part of IU Indianapolis and IU Purdue. During his time at IUPUI, he played on the very first intercollegiate basketball team. He later served on the Board of Visitors at the Kelley School and was a loyal alumnus of IUPUI, spearheading the Michael A. Carroll Scholarship Program for young athletes and facilitating the provision of athletic scholarship funding from First Indiana as well as from other sources. He's a member of the IUPUI Athletics Hall of Fame. Bud has also been engaged in many other community activities, such as chairing the annual campaign for the United Way of Central Indiana. He was involved from the outset in the Economic Club, serving for some years as chair of its finance committee, and was also president of the club for a term. He and others are credited with making the club a going concern in those years, obtaining critical early assistance from supporting organizations throughout the community, and helping making the club the community institution that it is today. Bud also served for many years as program chair and remained involved on that committee for decades, where he brought an important perspective on relevant and engaging potential speakers. Please join me in a big round of applause to show our gratitude and our appreciation to Bud for all that he has done. And one more round for all of our present table guests. All right, as usual, you'll note that there are white cards on your table. If you have a question for our speaker today, you can fill out one of those cards, raise it up during the program, and one of the members of our event team will collect your questions. And as a reminder, you can tweet your questions also to @EconomicClubIn, and we encourage you to continue to tweet about today's luncheon. So now let's pick up that conversation where we left off. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back shortly to begin the program. Thank you. I'm back. I hope everyone enjoyed your lunch and enjoyed the camaraderie at the tables. I think as much as anything, the importance of this time together is to catch up and share ideas and thoughts from across all the corners of our world. But we're going to go ahead and get started now. I have the great honor of introducing our speaker. With more than 30 years of executive leadership in the utility industry, John Baer joined MISO in 2004 as President and Chief Operating Officer, where he was responsible for overseeing the initial design, implementation, and daily operations of MISO's energy markets and transmission system planning. In 2009, John was named Chief Executive Officer, ultimately becoming President and CEO in January of 2025. As President and CEO, he spearheads MISO's continuous efforts to work collaboratively with its members to reliably deliver low-cost energy through efficient and innovative operations and planning. Prior to joining MISO, John was president of Houston-based Reliant Resources, as well as serving as managing director of Reliant's European operations. In addition to serving at the helm of MISO, John has been in many leadership positions of nonprofit energy industry organizations around the globe, including multiple terms as president of GEO15, an international association formed in 2004, comprised of the world's largest power market and grid operators responsible for managing more than 50% of global energy flows. He also serves as board chairman of the Energy Systems Network, an initiative focused on building an energy ecosystem that integrates all aspects of the energy landscape to develop clean energy solutions. Additionally, he is a member of the board of the Electric Power Research Institute, a nonprofit which focuses on energy and environmental research. John has served as a member of the President's Nuclear Energy Advisory Committee, is a former board member of the NERC regional entity Reliability First, and a founding board member of the Amsterdam Power Exchange. In his free time, which I can't imagine there being very much of, given this impressive resume of professional contribution, John is an active member of multiple philanthropic organizations, including the governance board of the Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana chapter of the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Indiana Fire Academy Soccer Club. John graduated from Southern Methodist University with both bachelor's and master's degrees in business administration. He attended the INSEAD Advanced Management Program for Senior Executives. Please join me in welcoming MISO President and CEO, John R. Baer.
Very quiet. Thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Harris. I really appreciate that. Oh, you want me to change the slides? But I thought you were going to do that for me. No, thank you very much. I especially enjoyed the conversation we got to have at lunch. Bud somehow got his wife to come. I invited my wife to come today, and she said, "You're going to speak?" I've got other things I need to do. So thank you for the advice on how to work that out. Hopefully today we'll be able to provide you guys some good context from a lot of different dimensions. Again, the GEO15 being the largest grid operators on the planet, market operators. We get together 3-4 times a year, and it's unbelievable the challenges that we have in common, right? And those challenges are the same as we're facing across the United States, different stages of them in different places, but most all the same. And then again, bringing that back down into Indiana and thinking about what we're facing as an industry in the context of economic development. So hopefully I can bring some of those things to bear, and then we'll have some good Q&A stuff for you all as we get through that and make it through the backside. So first of all, what the heck is a MISO? A lot of your folks probably aren't as familiar with MISO as I would wish you were. But the truth is, if we do our job, you won't know who we are. So grid operators have become sort of cool lately. There's a lot of work that we're doing to integrate renewables, to decarbonize the grid, and to make things work really well and seamlessly behind the scenes, to keep costs down and to keep reliability high. MISO was developed in the early 2000s, really to provide independent transmission access to the grid. And you sort of think about us as an air traffic controller that sits over the top of most of the utilities, most of which I've seen here today, which is wonderful. And they buy and sell their energy through us. And what we're able to do is then create a really efficient exchange for them to get the lowest cost energy to deliver to those of us who are at home. The other thing we do is we try to think about the transmission planning that we're going to need for the grid of tomorrow and the resources that are coming and how we handle that and how we work on that. And then they administrate the wholesale energy market. So just to put that in context for you, sort of that reserve pool that we put in place so that an Indiana, who on its own would have to carry maybe 20% more resources than it needs, as part of this pool carries about 7% of more resources than it needs. So there's a big value proposition that goes with sort of this overlying entity that we provide. And it serves about 45 million people, as you can see, across a broad swath of the United States, which has tremendous diversity in terms of weather and in terms of resources, which is all really valuable and lowers the cost and raises the reliability to the end users. And we last year cleared over $40 billion through our energy market, so it's not a small enterprise that is working things through. So for a mere cost of about $400 million a year, which is what we run, we create a little over $6 billion a year in value. And so we are very proud of our sort of leveraged model, if you will, there. So remember, it's MISO, it's not soup. It is a very important function for you guys, and hopefully we can continue that. So how do we then bring that forward into Indiana and put it in sort of the context of economic development? I've lived here for just over 20 years now. Spent a lot of time in Texas growing up there, and a lot of time in Europe. And I will tell you, I've never seen more economic development opportunities in a place ever. I mean, it's just unbelievable as we work with both all of our utilities that are here, as we visit and talk to the governor's office and the commerce folks. It is incredible, and we're seeing this all across our footprint, right? If you think about what I just showed you, all the way from Minnesota and the opportunities that are happening there, and in Wisconsin, whether it's reshoring, and I'll get into more of the detail on this later, whether it's LNG facilities in eastern Texas and in Louisiana, data centers everywhere. It's pretty amazing what's going on in terms of a growth and an economic development opportunity. But Indiana specifically is pretty amazing. When I first moved here, I remember doing a lot of research and having a lot of tutelage from some nice folks, one of which is here today, Ken Zagzebski, who reminded me of how Indiana operates. It's not just corn and agriculture, which is where it started and where most people think, but the industry here is pretty unbelievable, right? Steel production, we're first, auto manufacturing, top 3, pharmaceuticals, top 5. That's pretty impressive. And if you sort of take this over to the right side of the page, and then I'll come back to the middle, you know, having a population that's 17th in the country, but overall, from a consumption standpoint of energy, Indiana is just about 9th or 10th. So that's heavily weighted, again, by that industrial sector that you see that's there in 5th. And so Indiana does have a very different economy. It's not as well known as maybe some have, but 1 in 5 people in this state works in manufacturing. That's pretty amazing, right? And when you think about what's happening and what's here. The education system here that is also driving that economics is a great recipient of that as we hire a lot of those employees from Purdue and Rose-Hulman and Indiana, Notre Dame, et cetera. It's really got all of those things that we need to drive that economic growth. And most importantly, the opportunity, which is really there. And so the question is, how do we balance that, right? How do we manage that growth? And how do we push that growth forward in an industry that, quite frankly, is not great at growth, right? The electric industry is nothing you hear of in a business school when they say, let us tell you about change agents. Let's talk about things that are nimble, right? And they can move quickly. That is not our industry, right? Forever, we have surveyed problems, analyzed them, you know, gotten analysis out to 6 decimal places, made sure it's really safe, and then we step forward, right? I mean, think nuclear in the 70s and the 60s. That's sort of how we did that. Things are changing, and our culture has to change, and it has to go through all the systems and the processes within everything we do, whether it's regulatory processes, whether it's how we think about things from a commercial business, those partnerships between the commercial businesses and the utilities. All of those things have got to change pretty significantly for us to make this work and for us to be successful. So let's look a little bit macro at the generation fleet that we operate and have operated, and how that's changing and what that's going to mean for us, right? So if you look at the left side of the page here, what you see is where we were in 2010. Left side of the page is generating capacity, so just general capability for a machine to create energy. And on the right side is the actually energy it creates, right? And you'll see a bit of a separation as we move from the left side to the right side in terms of how these things work. But if you just go back to 2010 and you look at the capacity we had, about 53% of that capacity was coal. Now that's across the whole Midcontinent, right? So think about that. And then go to 2010 on the right side of the page, and you can see that 75% of the energy that was used at home was produced by coal, right? So between 2010 and 2025, significant changes happened to that fleet, right? A lot of the older coal has been retired. A lot of natural gas has been put in place. The nuclear stayed about the same. And you can see a significant uptick in wind. The wind resources that we have down the central part of our country are phenomenal, right? Compared to everywhere else, they are really, really good. And that's why you're seeing that piece there. And so what you'll see then is a big change from 2025 to 2010 on the right side of the page in terms of the consumption of how energy was. So 75% coal to 26%. That is a significant change, right? 6% gas to 40% gas, significant change. Over that time, we've taken about 45% of the carbon out of the air across the Midcontinent. So significant progress has been made, right? The part of the frustration we have when we talk about our business and our industry, because it's easy to point at power plants, is that everyone wants us to go to zero tomorrow. Well, we've made pretty significant progress in a pretty short time frame, right? And we're poised to make even more progress. Now, 2040 is an estimate of all of the utilities that I showed you throughout that map of where MISO lives. I will also tell you with a caveat and an asterisk, this was done 2 years ago. And in case anybody has been asleep in a cave somewhere, the politics from 2 years ago have changed significantly, right? And not only have the politics changed significantly around fossil fuels, but also the economic opportunities have changed significantly. 24 months ago, we weren't talking about data centers. We weren't talking about remanufacturing. All of those things were just sort of out there, right? They were possibilities maybe. And now they're becoming more certainties. And so those two things together are going to put significant change as we are going through a revision of what you're going to see for the 2040 estimate here. But there's a couple of significant changes that I want to point out there. Is obviously big change in wind and solar. You can see that both on the capacity side as well as the energy side. Big change in storage or batteries, which is that maroon section that you see there. And then a real change from, let's say, what we see on the capacity side to what we see on the energy side, and why is that and what's happening. And it's a different mindset about how we generate and how we consume electricity. We're going to have a lot of gas capacity and still some coal capacity and a lot of nuclear capacity. But the gas capacity and the coal capacity is not going to run very often, right? When it's windy or sunny, we're going to deliver the wind and the sun, which is almost zero marginal costs to those that need to use it. But when it's not, and that happens, we're going to make sure we have some energy to deliver to you, right? And that means that we need to turn the gas on or turn the coal on, and I need things that I know when I push a button, they turn on and they stay on. Our biggest risk when we think about operating our portfolio to deliver energy to you all and to your businesses is when it's not windy or when it's not sunny. And it turns out there are 7-8 days when it's not windy and it's not sunny, and those can happen in a row, and that can be bad, right? And so as we start to think about how we balance this portfolio, I'm sure you've heard the term baseload generation or dispatchable generation, and that's going to be really important to think about that, right? It's not going to run very often, but again, when it runs, it's going to be critical and it's going to be really important. Giving you a sense of sort of the risk of our system today and where that looks, there's a group called the North American Reliability Corporation that sort of oversees us from a reliability standpoint. They take a look at all the different regions. Some entities like mine, which operate some of these regions, some don't. But this gives you a sense of where is everybody in terms of risk, right? And their risk of energy delivery. And that's measured by saying, look, we have a group of power plants. They're probably in a reserve sharing pool, just like MISOs are. And there's risk that those plants might not operate, right? Or maybe it's not windy, or maybe it's not sunny. And how do we think about that, right? So we set something we call a reserve margin, and it's different by region because every region has a little bit different construct in terms of its portfolio makeup. And if you meet that reserve margin or above that reserve margin, you're probably yellow. If you're right on top of that reserve margin, you're red. And if you're got more capacity than that reserve margin is, you're blue. Now, I would argue that red is a good thing because what that means is we have just what we need, right? But that also means that we have to keep moving, right? Remember I talked to you about our nimble industry that's so great and moves fast? It doesn't, right? But we're changing, and that change has got to happen. It's got to happen quickly so that we can keep up, because as you start adding significant growth to this equation, that takes all those processes and systems that we've been operating under, and it puts them under significant stress. And that's what you're seeing now across most of the Midcontinent, and even in the Southeast, as well as the central part of the United States. So we're trying to make sure that we can keep up with this reserve margin and make sure that we have the energy that we need while we're meeting those state climate goals and other things so we can move forward. So let's talk a little bit about the economic development that's really impacting this picture and forcing it into change. If you go back over in time, again, we had significant growth in our industry back in the 50s and 60s, right? You had appliances that were coming into play and they were becoming mainstream, air conditioning, all right, which is how population growth happened in the Midwest and the Southeast, all those kinds of things, but significantly slowed to where for the last 20 years, we have not had a lot of growth, right? We had LED light bulbs, we had more efficient appliances, all those things that were happening such that we were able to keep our load growth under 1%. even with new businesses being brought in, right? That's changing, as you guys know. If you look at the right side of this page and you know the things that are happening just here in the state of Indiana, whether it's a chip foundry, whether it's a data center, pharmaceutical manufacturing, battery factories, those kind of things are happening, and they're happening quickly. The other parts of our footprint, we're seeing significant data centers, a couple of which have been announced that I can talk about, some of which are going to be announced here quickly that frighten me and I can't, but these data centers are the size of the city of Indianapolis, right? So if Ken Zagzebski had to rebuild his system every 3 years, that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about significant growth, right? And this growth is 24/7, 365 energy, right? There's a little bit of flexibility in there, but there's not a lot. And so we've kind of had a bit of a tussle with some of the DOE folks last term where they said, well, these folks are going to be flexible, right? And we said, well, they have customers that need 24/7, 365 power, and they need to understand they're using your data analytic tools to make all this work, right? I've now got load that's moving around. I need to forecast what the wind is and where it is, the sun, and I need to correlate all those things together so I can make sure that I can deliver electricity to you all at your home and at your businesses. And I'm using data cloud computing to do that. So if they're going to be flexible and turn down the energy they use, they're going to turn MISO and other folks like me off, and that's not going to work. So we're going to have to find a different solution to make sure we can work that out, right? And there's a lot of things that are being done there to make sure this economic development can be met, but those things are really important, right? And it starts with the processes that I talked about, making sure we get those in the systems set up from a regulatory standpoint, and then we've got to think differently about our assets. I know Governor Holcomb has just come out with some executive orders yesterday related to coal plants. And again, I'm okay with those coal plants staying on. If you want to replace those with a gas plant or some other plant that's the equivalent, I'm good with that too. But I just don't want them just to turn off, right? And then we're going to try to replace it with renewables. That equation doesn't work. We need all of the above, right, to make this happen. So how does that work in terms of a stakeholder view, right, on what we think we need to do to make all this work? And hopefully this will drive some questions and some dialogue from you all as we sort of think about that. So I'll start with MISO and the things we're doing. We have really stepped back in the last, I would say, 36 months and completely redesigned our market design in terms of the market price signals we're sending, how we send those price signals, the time horizons with which we send those price signals, the consequences that we have, as well as the rewards we have for operating your power plants well. And we've seen significant changes across our fleet just to get more out of what we have. And the example I'll give you is if you go 3 years ago to when we had Storm Uri, I think that was the one we had on Christmas Eve, if I'm remembering right. We had about 20% forced outage rate across our fleet. What does that mean? That means 20% of our power plants failed on that cold day, right, when we were all hunkered down at home. And the last storm we just had, which was about 2 months ago, we had 6% forced outage rate. That's pretty different, right? So price signals and incentives in a capital market work, right? And we're seeing those go to work. But we can't keep up with what's coming with just that, right? So we're building new transmission, significant transmission. We've approved about $45 billion worth of transmission rebuild in the region I showed you over the last 4 years. That's significant, and it's a big number. But what it allows us to do is to take the wind and solar that you as customers and me as customers are investing in and move it where we need to move it very inexpensively when it's windy and sunny. And when it's not, we can take those dispatchable resources that I talked about and move those where they need to go, right? So it's much more efficient use of that system, especially when we have the significant storms that we have. Inevitably, with the weather change we've seen, we're having more tempered weather. It doesn't get as cold for as long, but when it gets cold, it gets really cold, right? And we're experiencing those kinds of things such that it's really stressing our systems. And the ability to transmit things around there is much more efficient and much better. So we're trying to go through those kind of things to make sure that we can accommodate what the utilities want to do and incentivize them to do those kind of things. What we are working with them on is deferring resource retirements, making sure that if resource is being retired, it's replaced by something that is similar so that we have one for one, right, and we're not degrading, and then working with them to build new resources, where they should build them, how they should build them, and how they fit into our system so that we can meet the load of tomorrow, including all this economic development that we're talking about. Now, there are some significant supply chain issues, and I'll be shocked if we don't have a tariff question as we go through that. But we had supply chain issues 2 years ago, significant supply chain issues. You know, we are trying to gear up a supply chain. Remember, I showed you that zero growth for a long time there that hasn't been used in a long time. And when you don't use something in a long time, there's not a lot of orders there. You know, generally the folks that are in that supply chain creating gas turbines or pipelines, electric transmission infrastructure, they don't do a lot of work, right, in our country. They're working in China, they're working in India, they're working in other places and not here. And so, you know, getting that that supply chain ignited is going to be a big part of what we're doing. And so as you look at the things that we're trying to work on to shorten up the regulatory process, to work with the businesses and industries to commit, you know, part of the discussions we've had a lot of behind closed doors trying to understand data centers, how they operate, how big should they be, where should they be located, and then they try to negotiate between 5 different parties on where they're going to put something. Make a commitment, right? You're going to have to make a commitment. I mean, these guys they can construct a data center in probably 24 months, and it's going to take 4 to 5 years to build the power plants that they need. And so you've got a big mismatch. How are we going to close that gap to make that work, right? And so if you think about it across all these different stakeholder groups, we're going to have to squeeze, right? And we're going to have to think about things a lot differently than we have in the past. And then there's, from a government, business, general community standpoint, sort of balancing things from an environmental standpoint, from an economic development standpoint, and from a decarbonization standpoint of how do I find the best mix for those things. They don't have to be either or. They just need to be melded together to where we have a best solution for all. So we can make sure that we're keeping the lights on and we're doing it really efficiently. So with that, I'd be happy to pause and take any questions or dialogue or anything else that you guys want to chat about.
Have a seat?
I will.
Okay, great. Well, I know we always, this is a really engaged audience, so I know we're going to get a lot of great questions, but I can kick off with a few. Sure. And I guess, you know, maybe we should just get that suspense about the tariff question out of the way right out of the gate. Talk about trending topics, right? That's what we talk about here. And tariffs have been in the news. So I'm wondering if you could talk specifically about how tariffs will affect MISO and downstream costs of power for consumers, and how much of the power supply chain is domestic versus foreign?
So the tariffs are going to generally make it harder to get the material we need, and it's going to drive the cost up. The solar panels are not made here. Most of the solar infrastructure is not made here. I think 95% of it is coming from Asia. The wind turbines, probably 70% of those are not made here in terms of the infrastructure that's needed. Transformers, all those things that we need to put this infrastructure in place are not here. And so it's going to raise the costs, and it's not going to help the timing. But again, it's one of those things that we have got to have a concerted effort to ignite these supply chains so we can get things moving, right, and moving in the right direction. The good news is, from a gas supply standpoint, most of that stuff is here, whether it's gas turbines, whether it's the pipelines that we need and things like that. But again, the supply chain's got to get moving.
Okay, thank you. And they're coming in already. I'll go get another one going while I look through these. So you did talk a lot about the importance in our state and to our communities of economic development, and we are all invested in making sure there's enough power plants, and you touched on this, but maybe giving you a little bit of opportunity to talk in even more depth about how we're going to make sure that we can generate all that power, and especially knowing of the AI power hungry, and we've got all these big data centers coming in. How do you plan to support these increasing power requirements?
So we have 2 big planning processes that we're working to make sure we can do that. One is a transmission planning process, which is moving forward very rapidly, and we've approved, I think, almost $7 billion of transmission construct just in the state of Indiana to tie it into that broader regional grid so that we can have access to all that energy, and again, preserve that reserve pool so that we have to build less, right, to get more. So that's the first step. The second is we're doing a lot of work with the local utilities as they have these opportunities to think about the infrastructure And how do we do that? When you think about putting something the size of the city of Indianapolis somewhere inside of a grid, it's going to have major disruptive factors. So how do we balance that? How do we tie that in? So a lot of work is going on the infrastructure there to think about that. And then helping them work with a plan to ramp up these facilities so that the power is there to support them when they need it. And we match up those timelines. So there's kind of the three biggest things we're working on.
Well, then, as you made multiple references to ramping up, that requires human resources and a talent pipeline. What would you see as the things we need to be doing here in Indiana to make sure that that workforce is available?
Yeah, the good news is the state of Indiana is a tremendous pipeline for us, for our people. I mean, we are, I would guess somewhere around 60% of our employees, of 1,200 employees, are from the state of Indiana, from one of those universities here in Indiana. So that part is a big help. They've been doing a lot of work with us to help understand what we need and the talent we need, and it's changing more from just sort of electrical engineering and those sorts of things more to the analytical capabilities that go with this. The things we do are happening too fast and they're too complex for us to do, on a sort of a manual basis. So we have a lot of automation within our tools and predictive analytics and things like that. So we've probably, I think I shared this with you, we've turned over probably 40% of our workforce over the last 36 months, sort of retraining and getting the new talent that we need in there around, the predictive and data analytics and things like that. So it's a big change for us.
And that does seem aligned with a number of the initiatives within the state to focus on that particular sector of talent. So nice alignment there.
Right.
How is MISO preparing for more electric vehicles on the grid?
So we're doing a lot of work, back to that futures that I showed you guys, where we sort of work with our members to understand what are all of their plans between now and 2040 and how are they thinking about that. They've got electric vehicle penetration rates, charging stations they're putting in, those kinds of things. So we're trying to, number one, understand that so we understand the load. The second thing is, how does it affect us? Are we going to incentivize them to charge at night? Are they going to charge in the daytime? Are they going to charge anytime? How do we think about those kind of things? And then we're also doing some work now with how do we tie them into the grid equation? So when we have shortages on our grid, how do we send price signals to where people don't want to charge their car and they might even want to discharge their car, right? So taking that to the next level. So there's a lot of that work going on around the EVs now.
Thank you. This one kind of does, kind of folds into a question I had to lead off with as well. Well, I'll just frame it. I'll just say it this way and maybe save that one for later.
Let's go with it.
What is the number one issue that keeps you up at night related to the reliability of the electric grid?
It's something we haven't talked about. It's still cybersecurity, right? I mean, when I first started at MISO, I was the chief operating officer, as you noted, and we used to make sure everybody had McAfee loaded on their PC on their desk, and then we kind of moved on. The amount of time, money, and effort that we spend on a minute-by-minute daily basis protecting our systems. We know we're clearing $40 billion of transactions through a system. There's a lot of people that are interested in that, right? And we have to protect that. And then, of course, there's the integrity of the grid. I mean, bringing the grid down it's a well-known threat. And so it's one of those things that we try to deal with every minute of every day to protect that from an electronic and a digital standpoint. And the more dispersed we get, or whether it's just, used to be, remember we had one big power plant, now we've got 40 wind turbines, right? Those kind of things. They've all got digital electronics on them. And so making sure that we've got the systems in place to identify those threats as we see them, to put them down and to deal with them is tough.
And that's something we think about in healthcare, certainly, and I know other industries have their particular vulnerabilities in terms of all the things that are connected and run by computers, ventilators, IV pumps. And so in addition to those both the threats of physical attacks, cyber warfare, there's the concern about just the reliability of an aging power grid, and this question about the smart grid allowing us to replace some of that aging infrastructure without a wholesale swap out of physical stuff. Is there anything that any ways that MISO can contribute to that?
Well, there's sort of two ways. The first way is within just the high voltage transmission system. We have done a whole lot to sort of get let's say, as much out of the transmission line as possible. So we've probably got 98% of the value out of that transmission line. Some of it's using smart grid tools, which are a bit of a rounding error on our side because of how we deal with the transmission lines, changing the ratings and those kind of things. There is real value in the coordination we're doing with our utilities, though, with the smart devices that they're installing both in your home on your thermostat, but also within the distribution system, so that we can allow it to participate better in stressful grid conditions.
Okay, thank you. So these are linked. There's several here. The question, the first, what effects on energy demand is MISO planning for related to global warming and climate change? And then linked to that, getting a little more specific. First of all, thank you for your presentation, John.
Yes.
From someone in the audience. I'm sure that person's in good company for thanking you for your presentation. That you talked about aligning with state climate goals. How does MISO align itself with municipal or local climate goals? So just kind of everything under climate there.
Okay, so the first part was around weather and climate change and how we're thinking about it there. And what we're seeing is weather is becoming less volatile from a standard deviation standpoint on a day-to-day basis, right? It's becoming a little bit warmer and the temperatures aren't moving around quite as much. Now that's a generalization. So if you think about across our footprint though, that's what's happening. However, what we're finding is these 100-year storms that used to happen every 100 years are happening every 18 months. And so what we're seeing is a polar vortex. They used to be just cold fronts when I was a kid, but now they're polar vortices. So they'll move in and they'll cause us to have 4-degree temperatures in Little Rock, Arkansas. And last year it snowed 18 inches in New Orleans. That's pretty rare, right? But we've seen that 3 times now over the last 5 years. So when you start to think about that kind of extreme weather, which lasts maybe 2 to 3 days, that's kind of our new normal. And so the question we're dealing with is how do we deal with that, right? And that's led us to work more with our neighbors. So when you think about there's significant markets the size of MISO, both to the east and west of us, these weather fronts don't generally sit on all of us at the same time. They move along. And so there's a lot of value we can gain from doing that. How we think about climate goals from a state basis is very simple. And it's really the same answer as we get them from municipalities. Whoever that representative utility is that works with us, whether it's a municipality, a cooperative, or an investor-owned utility, we're gathering that information as we put together those futures that I talked to you about. And so those will be incorporated in how we think about things.
Okay. So I think this is continuing on this, forward thinking and next generation. Someone noted that from your presentation, it appears that nuclear generation may be decreasing, but wonders how, and I'm going to say I don't know what SMRs are, but I bet you do. And whoever asked the question does, how SMRs will be deployed in the future.
So there's sort of, think about traditional nuclear and then the small modular reactors.
Oh, that's what they are.
Yeah, so we are seeing, we have 3 nuclear power plants right now that are looking to be repowered, meaning brought back online. And so that's pretty significant, right? I know Palisades is one of them in Michigan. I can't think of the other one right now. It's in Iowa. Maybe Davis-Besse. But anyway, those are being brought back online. So that's a big deal. There's still a lot of talk around small modular reactors. I think the promise is big, but it's still 10 to 15 years away. We don't have anything at scale that is operating now. So they've got to get through that process so that we can get those things, out there and available. So it's going to take some time, but I think it's going to play a big role. There's no certainty around that, which is why you're not seeing that in those futures that I showed you. Now, as we revise those futures now, compared to 2 years ago, you may start to see them show up.
And is that something that gets affected by some of the other challenges to the supply chain of the current technologies?
That's
so
a
that
supply
could be
chain that's
something
also
that,
going to have to be reignited.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
There's not a lot of nuclear engineers running around that are under 50.
So then we've got a couple, this gets to impact on individuals. It kind of touches into the not in my backyard, phenomenon. So one question, we see a lot of pushback from neighbors and community members regarding data centers. What are some of the misconceptions about data centers, and how do we turn public opinion in a positive way?
So I think that there's sort of a couple big things, is that and some of that depends on your perspective, right? We're seeing Data center opportunities in certain states where folks will say, you know what, they don't provide a whole lot of long-term constant jobs, and so we don't necessarily want to go through the pain that it takes to put them here. There are other parts of our footprint, Louisiana and Mississippi are two that I would name, where they say, look, we love the construction jobs anyway, right? So just the construct of something that big that's going to take 24 to 36 months to build and then has some ongoing jobs and property taxes and those kind of things, we'd love it. Bring it all here as much as you can. So I guess it sort of depends on the lens that you look through, right, and where you are. Now, the value of the data center, which sometimes gets lost, no one builds a data center just because it's a data center that sits out there. I would be the biggest cheerleader you've ever seen, right? And I'm sure a lot of the other folks in here who are using predictive analytics, data analytics, and the computing power that these things can provide to operate their business are big fans, right? We can run things through a data center cloud setup and calculate things 5 or 6 times faster. That's incredible than what we can build from a data center standpoint in our own parking lot. So they do provide pretty tremendous benefits for the businesses.
So, sort of tangentially linked, how do you maintain wind and solar infrastructure over the years that exist on Indiana farmland? Should we be concerned about environmental issues with the wind and solar equipment?
You know, I don't think so, because, and I would again defer to my utility friends who are here who actually do the operations and maintenance on those things, but from what I know and what I've learned that they've taught me about those things is they are under constant surveillance, they're under constant maintenance. In fact, there's different replacement plans so that when a wind turbine that is significantly more efficient than the one that's already in place, they go out and they replace those. So I think from an environmental standpoint, it's pretty solid.
Okay. There are a lot of questions here. We knew this was going to be a good topic, so thank you again for saying yes to our request. Recently, Canada announced a significant reduction in energy exports to the U.S. How will this affect MISO and consumers in Indiana?
Well, I think that was one of those, it was almost Trumpian in itself, because it was announced in the morning and I received a letter stating as such, and by lunchtime I had a letter that pulling back and rescinding the complete statement that they had made. We get about 3% of our power from Canada, and I think once they looked at bringing us power and bringing back money, they changed their mind. So I don't know how that's going to work. There may be a tariff that goes either way at some point, sometime, but right now we're sort of operating without anything.
Okay. So we hang on.
Yes.
Here's just wide open. If you could snap your fingers and change 2 to 3 things or aspects of the electric grid, what would you change?
Oh, wow.
This could take us to the end of the hour.
Yeah, so I would do 2 quick things. I would make small modular reactors viable and commercial so that we could start putting them in today. And the other thing is I would solve for this problem of I need something that is dispatchable, meaning I can control it, and it can run for a long duration. And I would use 7 days to 8 days as my proxy for that. And the reason for that is when it's not windy, right? If I had something like an iron air storage that I could turn on that wasn't emitting any carbon, like a gas or a coal plant, that'd be pretty great.
All right. Any others?
There might be others, but
okay,
those,
that's the
everything's
big one.
Way outshone by those.
Okay. What characteristics of working and collaborating with governmental agencies across such a vast part of the U.S. Have resonated most with you? Any leadership nuggets from the best-run agencies you work with?
You know, I think that there's 2 things I would take away from it. One is that we've seen tremendous value in the differences between the states, right? So if you have one state that is very motivated and moving forward to build natural gas power plants, a lot of industry and those kind of things. You have another state that has wind and solar very heavy. Sort of the benefits of tying those 2 states together is tremendous, right? And the value for both of them. So that's been a big so what. In terms of just tying it back to the piece I talked about when we talked a little bit about the stakeholder pieces, is that the pace of change is outstripping our processes. And so we have got to speed things up from a regulatory standpoint. And we're going to have to take a little bit of risk as states and de-risk some of these investments that we're asking our utilities to make on a very, very expedited time horizon so that we can make sure that we get the economic development there, which I think is going to be good for everybody.
Your reference to regulations tees up the next question. Well, what are your thoughts on the executive order eliminating regulations in 5 years?
Yeah, I would have to have an interpretation of what that means, I guess, is, less regulation is probably better. I know we have a lot of regulation in our industry. A lot of those things that apply to permitting and siting and things like that can really slow down the processes that we're trying to execute against. So, those kind of things just need to be all thought about really thoughtfully. I'd rather have it be thought about in a really intentional way versus just say we want 1 for 4 or 4 for 1 or 5 for 1.
I think that would, maybe I'm going to ask this question, you see if it triggers anything more in that regard. Does the current administration's stance on energy policy change your view on capacity and energy mix for the next 10 to 15 years? Anything that you think?
It doesn't change my view. It changes our ability to execute. It makes it either harder or easier, right, to get done what we need to get done. And probably the hardest part is everybody, I think personally, has probably learned over the last 2 weeks, is capital markets don't like uncertainty, right? If you have any questions about that, pull up your 401k or your retirement plan, and I'm sure you can see it there. So if you can imagine our industry as a microcosm, if we swing every 4 years, no fossil fuel, all fossil fuel, just one or the other, we can't keep having that because capital markets and the investments we need, we're talking about billions of dollars here, and we've got to have some certainty.
Yeah. Well, that leads, again, to, I think, nicely to this next question about the swings. And so, thinking about the momentum to the move to renewables picked up steam, pretty significantly over the last 5 years, and maybe you might suggest that we have learned that might have been too far too fast. And I don't know if you think that was a good characterization of that, but if so, what was missed? What can we learn from some of the swings that we've taken and the pace of that could help us plan more effectively into the future?
Interestingly enough, if you go back 8-9 years ago, is when it really picked up, right? And so we saw significant increases in wind and in solar. And then what happened over the last, I'd say, 4 years or 5 years is federal policy got way out in front of state policy. So we had all these incentives for wind and solar. They came towards us, and just for context, we operate a system, and if you want to isolate yourself at a cocktail party, jot this down. So we operate a system that has about 130 gigawatts of load, and that's just for context. Our interconnection queue, or the amount of capacity that wants to interconnect to MISO, is 360 gigawatts. Think about that. It's almost 2.5 times the amount of load we have. And a lot of that stuff made it through our interconnection queue, which just studying that alone was arduous enough and has really slowed us down and made it very difficult for our utilities that are in the room to get generation moved to the front of the queue. But we've got about 60 gigawatts, again, that's half of our load, through that interconnection queue, but it's asking for a 3-year delay because they either don't have an offtake agreement, they can't get the supply through the supply chain. So we didn't match up sort of state policies with federal policies. I get a sense now that we're getting a better calibration on that, and I think that's going to help us go forward. But the key is not to make it 0 or 100. We need all of it, right? We need all that energy we can get, and we need the wind and solar, and it's incredibly valuable. But we also need the other energy to make sure that when it's not windy and sunny, we can keep the lights on.
I guess under the heading of all we can get, someone is curious to hear your opinion on the feasibility of offshore wind production on the Great Lakes.
So I know a lot of folks have looked at that. The Great Lakes, unfortunately, unlike the North Sea and even the Gulf of Mexico, where it has been very plausible, is deep. It's really deep. And there's also a lot of ice, and there's a lot of wind. And so when you think about deep, blowing ice, wind, it's not a good place for offshore wind unless the technology changes.
Which is probably why we haven't done it yet.
Exactly.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add that it's occurred to you that we haven't asked in this, like,
it's
1 minute?
It's a pretty thorough set of questions.
Well, we thank you.
Thank you very
we
much.
thank you for coming and spending your time with us. We know, and we thank everybody for showing up, putting pressure on your work week to come and be part of these discussions and move our community forward. I'm gonna have to go back down there because I jumped up so quickly, I didn't take my last little script, so I'm gonna have to go there and then come back up here to set us all on our way. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
For joining us.